obviously within the Christian faith there are lots and lots of different churches within, you know, the different ways of worshipping. But somebody wouldn't say they were Christian unless they had a faith. And I now realise, in all the years that I've been teaching, because we've been teaching it as a religion and as a faith as far as Judaism is concerned, it's as much about a lifestyle.
Yeah.
It's culture.
It's a tradition.
Yeah.
It's the tradition.
Tradition.
And that's
why
I find,
I'm conscious
Yes.
of time.
I'm quite sure there would be
Yes.
other people within the group who would say that no, you need to have faith. I think it varies amongst. I'm very aware that everybody within the group that we're with have got very different ideas.
Yes. But to talk about the history, I mean, this is part of why it's built, because it enters every aspect of your life. This is why we can actually talk about Jewish history in the way we can. That the fact that there are lots of different Jewish organisations, not just the synagogue. Anyway, this synagogue was built, beautiful building, at the heart of where the Jewish population were living, because it's important to be within walking distance of the synagogue, because of the, you know, you mustn't do any work which includes walking and carrying and all the rest of it if you're strictly observant. But no sooner had this community built this building than a whole wave of people swept out of the Russian state. People cite pogroms, but it wasn't just about pogroms. Pogroms were happening, but a number of other factors. There was conscription to the Tsar's army. At this time, 25 years you could be in the army and never see your family during that 25 years, so that wasn't very popular. Jewish people were not allowed to live in the heart of the Russian state, you know, around Moscow. They were out in the Baltic states and Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, whatever. We've got a map through next door that shows all the places where Jews came from. But they were very restricted in what they could do and where they could live within the Russian Empire. But it didn't mean you couldn't be called up to the Russian, you know, into the army and serve the Tsar. It was okay for you to die for the Tsar. Also, this is a time when railways are being developed, so cheaper travel and easier travel is becoming, you know, possible. Steamships, again, cheaper and easier travel, so it's easier to leave. And there's all sorts of ideas, you know, fermenting about emancipation and Jews, you know, being equal to other people and feeling that they wanted more freedom, they wanted to take control of their lives, and they felt they had to do that by leaving the Russian state. So they poured in here, but they weren't particularly wealthy, most of the people that came here. They ended up living in the Gorbals area, which is a notorious slum area. It developed into, on the other side of the river from here, south of the river. It was known as the Scottish shtetl, you know, ancestral village. There were shops with, you know, Hebrew lettering, or Yiddish was the language used, which is a Germanic language but written in Hebrew letters. So we have pictures of Hebrew shops, you know, or Yiddish signs on shops and in the area. And it wasn't, the Gorbals wasn't just for Jewish immigrants, so there were a lot of Irish migrants living there. There were also migrants from the Highlands of Scotland who'd come down to work in the factories and shipbuilding and goodness knows all what in Glasgow. But people in this synagogue didn't necessarily want them coming and worshipping here, but they recognised their obligation. Yeah, this happened all over. They recognised their obligation, so many of the Jewish welfare organisations began in the synagogue, where they organised health care, organised helping their Jewish brothers and sisters to settle in and make their way in this country. There were 3 million Jews left the Russian state at this time and migrated. Many of them passed through the United Kingdom. Another reason why they would have ended up in Scotland, there were centuries-old links between the Baltic states and Scotland, trade links, shipping links. And I've been to a town called Kėdainiai in Lithuania, where in the 15th and 16th centuries the town maps show that the Jews and the Scots were living in the same part of town. So a big myth is that our Jewish ancestors who arrived here were duped thought they were going to New York, and they got off the boat, and oh, this wasn't New York, and they'd been tricked out of their money. I don't think it's true. Very often they came here as a staging post. Some meant to come here, but some, and stay here, but some meant to come here as a staging post. Maybe they had enough money to get here, and then they saved a bit more here a year or two and moved on. So there's been waves of people. But at its height, there were only ever 18,000 at most Jews living in Glasgow. So therefore, in Edinburgh, it's always been a smaller Jewish population, never more than about 1,000 as far as I'm aware. So at its height, we can talk about there maybe being no more than 20, 25,000 Jews in this country. And that's been reduced by 2/3 since it was at its height. So there's a very small number of us living here. We think 4,000 to 5,000 in the Glasgow area. We think no more than 10,000 to 12,000 in the whole of Scotland. But it's difficult to pinpoint exactly. So you're looking awfully...
No, I'm
We're a tiny minority, yes.
And has it dropped dramatically in the last couple of decades?
Yes.
Because as I was growing up, there were definitely, I was aware of a greater Jewish community within the Glasgow
A number
area.
of reasons. One is since the State of Israel was formed, many people have made Aliyah. Because we've always been a small community, it's always self-fulfilling. The smaller it gets, the more people want to go somewhere else where there's a bigger Jewish community.
It was a big enough community to be able to have its own golf. Is there still a Jewish golf course out at
A Jewish
Bonington?
golf club, yes, it's still there, but it's not 100% Jewish.
It was when I was younger.
And you're saying
that's what
old
it was.
enough, enough people, the reason they had to open that was because of anti-Semitism, and
Yes.
they weren't allowed to join other golf clubs.
Yeah.
So it's a dubious merit that they had their own golf club, but it is still there.
Yeah.
But it's not 100% Jewish membership.
Because it was sustainable before.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And there were Jewish butchers,
Yeah.
loads more. We've now got one kosher deli in Glasgow, for instance. No more Jewish butchers. Any kosher meat has to be brought up from England, from Manchester or
Right.
London. So yeah, there's a lot of things that we can't sustain anymore. And Jewish bakers, etc., no longer operating because we haven't got enough people. In this period, it's also a great expansion or the beginnings of the Zionist movement. Okay. Very slowly, trying to rush along.
Which is fascinating.
Check some stuff out.
Sorry.
You've been standing over the hotel.
Yeah.
Waiting for you.
Growth of Zionism. I would say that Zionism really sprang up within places like Odessa was where Zionism flowered. But the idea that the Jews should have their own homeland was very strong, and there were lots of Zionist organisations within Scotland. I'm going to have to cut this short and invite you to come back at some other time and see more, or you might get time to look. But Zionism, yes, was strong. I would also like to point out there was a Jewish Lord Mayor eventually of Glasgow, Mayor Galpin, or Lord Provost, I should say, not Lord Mayor, Lord Provost, but representative of the fact of many of the Jews were in sympathy with the socialist views of the wider Scottish community, were quite radical, were communists. I mean, again, you had the whole spectrum, but a lot of involvement with left-wings, with Zionists, with communists, with Labour values, that the Jews and the Scots had lots in common from that point of view. We also like to point out that Jewish soldiers fought for the British Army in the Boer War, they fought in the First World War, and they fought in the Second World War. Again, it's part of serving the country in which you're living and respecting their laws and making your contribution. And in the First World War, it's a very mixed picture. We've just been commemorating, it's 100 years since the First World War. Jewish soldiers signed up in the UK, and here's a whole platoon of them in front of the synagogue in the Gorbals. But Jewish soldiers were fighting in the Russian army, and Jewish soldiers were fighting in the German army. And being loyal citizens in this country, I personally find it particularly tragic, the fact that they were so behind the German state and willing to give their lives for the German state. And within 20 years we do talk about the fact that we had a number of refugees came to Scotland. A large number came on the Kindertransport, a rescue mission for Jewish children. Some of them arrived here with the Iron Cross medals that their grandfathers and fathers had been given in Germany. And yet they were, we all know how the picture changed. So that did have an impact on the Scottish Jewish community. We did receive children to move along in the Kindertransport. And also after the war was over, survivors came and found and made a new life here who'd survived the camps. And we had a number of members of our community, sadly fewer and fewer as time goes by, who came here as having survived Nazi Germany. And we've got a growing collection and growing interest in the Holocaust era within the Study Centre, and that's why we're looking at plans to develop that further and learn the lessons, if that's possible. Anyway, so the rest of the timeline, I mean, we talk about the fact that there was a Jewish newspaper published in Scotland between 1928 and the late 1990s. Now there are 2 Jewish newspapers that we get up here. One's published in Manchester but has Scottish News, and the other one's published in London. And if you're lucky, it might mention Scotland occasionally, but not very often.
True, yeah. That's true.
But there were newspapers in Yiddish as well, but we've got very few bits left of those, but we do know about them. Jewish old age homes, generally Jewish, there are Jewish care organisations which are now out on the south side of Glasgow. They developed, the Gorbals community did thrive, most of them, and do well and start moving out south, and they're now most of the Jewish community, or those who are Jewish in Scotland, will be living in Newton Mearns or Giffnock, despite what I said about, all over. But there are still synagogues operating in Dundee, in Aberdeen, and of course in Edinburgh we have an Orthodox synagogue and a liberal community. And in Glasgow we have the only Reform synagogue in Scotland. So generally speaking, it's quite an Orthodox traditional community we're talking about in Scotland. Although I do like to say that though most of the synagogues have been or are Orthodox synagogues, it doesn't necessarily mean they're living any different lives to the rest of us who are members of Reform or Progressive synagogues. Again, this wide range. There has never been an ultra-Orthodox presence really in Scotland. Those that you might have seen pictures of with what we call the Black Hatters or the Frummers, with the black hats.
No, the first time I saw that was in London. I had
Really?
never seen it here.
Very impressive.
We do have one rabbi who dresses like that, Rabbi Reuben out in Giffnock, who's wonderful. He's a real mensch. But generally speaking, there's not been an ultra-Orthodox, very Orthodox community ever living in Scotland at any time.
But there is no heretic existence? Who are the ones that like the
There's-
Hanukkah
that's
candle?
Lubavitch.
Lubavitch, okay.
Lubavitch.
They're very small there.
Yes.
Lubavitch is an organisation, a Jewish organisation that kind of does missionary work within the Jewish community, encourages people to observe the Jewish commandments and live a Jewish life. So, yeah, so they are in Glasgow. We do have a Lubavitch family or two. Okay, so I'm definitely running
These
past
are a
my
wee bit like
time.
our evangelists then.
And we
No,
they're
but
not-
no,
they're not
right. So
conversing
Judaism
anymore.
is absolutely not an evangelical religion.
No, but I'm just saying that they're coming back into.
They do pull people in, don't
They
they?
do, yes,
Yeah.
yes. I suppose they are evangelical, but within Judaism, they're not reaching out to anybody out